All right, let's see it. So I wouldn't call Titus's table of duties here biblical roles, since these are really just being borrowed from the broader Greco-Roman notion of the ideal household, where every member has a prescribed set of roles and duties that are supposed to contribute to the success of the household, and this carefully curated hierarchy with the patriarch at the top. So it's more Greco-Roman roles than it is biblical roles, and I would say it's problematic to appeal to this passage and to ignore the fact that a few verses down it tells enslaved peoples to obey their masters, precisely as it tells wives to obey their husbands. And so to pick out one feature of this ancient Greco-Roman concept of the ideal household and say this is still relevant to today, while hopefully flatly denying the relevance and the morality of another portion of the very same table of duties, is highly problematic. It demonstrates that we are picking and choosing. And if we are picking and choosing, something is guiding why we're picking one thing and not the other, and why we're rejecting one thing and not the other. And here it's very clearly to lean into structuring power and values in support of conservative Christian right-wing authoritarian identity politics, which is unfortunately misogynist and seeks to subordinate the interests of women to those of men, as we're going to see. So here's an interesting one. Respect, the same thing is not required of the husband in this passage. And if we look at the Greek, we can see why. The word that this creator is translating respect is phobeo, which really means to fear. Now, it can be translated to revere, but that has an element of fear. Revere is to be afraid of disapproval, or to be afraid to disobey because of the consequences. And this word is used to mean revere primarily when it is a subordinate in relation to either a ruler or a deity. And so the husband obviously has no such duty imposed upon him. He does not have to respect his wife because he is the one occupying the superior position that usually is filled by a ruler or a god. So again, this creator is appealing selectively to things that subordinate the power and the interests of women in order to structure power and values in favor of conservative Christian right-wing authoritarian identity politics. So we're going back to the Hebrew Bible for Exodus 20's version of the Ten Commandments, where it says you shall not commit adultery. But we need to note a few things about what adultery meant when these texts were composed. Adultery was not just any married person engaging in sexual intercourse outside of marriage. That really was only true for wives, because they were expected to be virgins when they got married, and then they became, in a significant sense, the property of their husband. Now, that husband was allowed to go outside of marriage to engage in sexual intercourse as long as it wasn't another married woman. He could take on as many wives and concubines as he wished. It was not adultery for a married man to go have sexual intercourse with an unmarried woman. It was adultery if he was having intercourse with a married woman, because that was a property crime against the husband. And so even if we look at Deuteronomy 22, where we've got these different penalties being assessed for different kinds of inappropriate sexual activity, it's the death penalty if a man sexually assaults a woman who's married, because it's a property crime against her husband. If he sexually assaults a woman who's not married, he just is required to marry her and is not allowed to divorce her, because in that case, he is depriving the father, who is considered the owner of that property until she is married, of the bride price that he would be expecting upon her marriage. So we still have systemic power asymmetries here. The woman is in a subordinate role, has far less power, and this creator is still blithely leaning into these selective identifications of passages that will structure power and values in the interests of conservative Christian right-wing authoritarian identity politics. This is another table of duties. So again, we're just reflecting the broader Greco-Roman concept of the ideal household. And the verb that is being translated here, be submissive, is the same verb that is used in Titus chapter 2 that this creator has as obey. And there is no such expectation on the part of the husband towards the wife in this passage. So again, this creator is rather blithely asserting that women are to be subjugated and subordinate to the authority and the power of their husbands. So here we have the notion on the part of another text that was not written by who it claims to have been written by, that women should be seen and not heard, and that way they can honor their husbands and the word of God. So more blithe misogyny. Again, we're being selective here. Paul in 1 Corinthians would prefer that everybody remain celibate and only get married if they cannot hack celibacy. But something that he says he tells all of his congregations is to stay in the circumstances in which you were when you were called by God. If you were married, don't get divorced. If you were not married, don't get married. If you don't have kids, don't have kids, because Jesus is coming back too soon. The time is short. There's no time to mess around with this kind of stuff. And in 1 Corinthians 7, the duties of intercourse are primarily about ensuring that sexual desire does not bubble up too violently, does not get out of control, but stays contained within the bounds it is supposed to. So Paul says not to have the passion of desire in your sexual activity, because that's for the dirty, dirty Gentiles. It should be holy and honorable, which suggests something more like a duty in order to stifle your spouse's sexual desires than it is something to enjoy. It's not clear to me what this creator thinks be a helper means, but the word there, ezer in Hebrew, is used to refer to what God is for Israel. So whatever this creator thinks being a helper entails, it's probably not the same thing the author of Genesis imagined. So again, I'm not exactly sure what this creator imagines that entails, but again, they are being selective with what they're drawing from a given text to assert is still relevant and authoritative to today, because Proverbs also, in several places, insists that righteous parents are supposed to be beating their children with rods. But again, we can't really identify biblical roles because the Bible is so inconsistent and disagrees with itself in so many places. It's not univocal. So when we isolate a bunch of roles to try to create this kind of consistent, systematized notion of biblical roles, we are actually creating that ourselves and then just appealing to the Bible as the proof text and as the authority. And so the real question is, why are we picking out the things we're picking out and arranging them the way we're arranging them? This creator is arranging them to promote the notion that women are subordinate to their husbands, whom they should fear, in pretty much the same relation that enslaved peoples are supposed to be to their masters. And this creator would do well to take a step back from deploying the Bible as a weapon and engage in some self-introspection and figure out why they are trying to structure power and values in favor of conservative Christian right-wing authoritarian identity politics.